I think that once you go through the different articles, and I've done that, we conclude very quickly that we are confronted not just with one crisis, but with several crises at the same time that have a different nature, that have different origins, and at the same time that have different consequences. One thing is linear across the different sections, is that it's always the same ones that suffer the consequences of these crises. It's people, it's workers, it's unemployed, it's young people, it's older people, it's migrant workers, it's people having standard employment relations and people having non-standard employment relations or precarious. It's people working in different sectors, be it in the formal or in the informal economy. People are suffering the consequences of this crisis, of course, although with a different impact depending on what are we talking about and where those persons are positioned. The second thing I draw from this book is that this is a crisis that has shown the failure of the current model of development. Nothing new. Trade unions have been talking about this for many, many years. No one has really heard that message in the past. But what we have seen clearly is that this crisis shows the failure of the current model of development, one which is more based on a casino economy than on the real economy, one which is based on borrowing money to have a decent life instead of earning the fair share of what you produce with your work. It's also a crisis of the left, and I think this is very worrying, and I'm sure that this is shared by everyone around this room. Because the left has always been the big support of the trade union movement, and if we have a crisis of the left, we have at the same time a crisis of trade unionism. And yet, I think that trade unions have never been so fundamental in order to find the solutions to this crisis, but also to advocate for workers' rights and interests, and also for a fairer economic and sustainable development model in today's world. So this book tells us very clearly that trade unions are not a dead duck, which sometimes they are told to be, and we know exactly who's pointing the finger and who's advocating that message. But one thing it's also clear is that the crisis has showed the urgent need for a reform of trade union organizations of the trade union movement, and some of the articles in the book indicate that in a very clear manner. And I think that needs to be addressed, and the better sooner than later, if really trade unions have a say in the shaping of the new model. And then I think it is a crisis in values. Solidarity is probably the most hardly hit value as a consequence of this crisis. And it also tells us very clearly that it is necessary to put solidarity back at the center of the policy action, but also at the center of trade union action. As I said before, it's a crisis that has shown very clearly the ineffectiveness of the policies advocating austerity at any cost. And we have seen that in many countries that's been the answer to the crisis: austerity, structural reforms, and structural policies.
In terms of the book, I was born in 1990 on the 26th of January in South Africa. A very important political period for us at that time, because then it signaled the shift of apartheid. But at the same time, that period was a period where neoliberalism was coming to dominate most corners of the world. And so I am part of a generation that has been born in a period where the mantra that says there is no alternative to neoliberalism had come to dominate the world, right? And so the book to me then, right, the book to me tries to construct the possibilities of achieving an alternative. But how does it do this? And to speak to the question of a struggle in a time of crisis, as we all know, crisis always precipitates change. But sometimes the more things change, the more they remain the same. And I think the question, the section on Europe in turmoil, where Herman looks at 11 states, he shows that what we see in Europe is the fortification of neoliberalism during the crisis. So things were changing, but we still remain within the neoliberal framework. So how do we think of the crisis, and how do we speak of the crisis in the book? We speak, I think, if I were to look at the book as part of the younger generation, it speaks to my generation to say, how do we construct a better world and fight for that world? And it also speaks to that generation that was in the golden age of capitalism, to say, of course, that generation is now faced with a crisis, and that crisis, as Maria has also said, it also speaks to what the postmodern thinkers have said, it's the fall of trade unionism. So trade unions are no longer relevant. But the book tries to show the relevance of trade unions.
One of the reasons why we started the Global Labor column was that we thought, as Mbuso said, we want to create a bit of a platform for debate. Very modestly, I mean, we will not change the world, but we wanted to contribute to that debate. And we did a number of these books, and I think this number of the books go a bit with the crisis. The first book was called Don't Waste the Crisis, because we thought it's an opportunity. The second was There is an Alternative, because we thought, well, we have shown there are new ideas, alternatives, new things come up, the kind of monolithic thing of neoliberal hegemony has broken. Now, the third was Confronting Finance, because we thought it's really what drives this whole thing is the finalization of the economy. And finally, we thought, okay, we had all the good ideas, nothing has changed, so the book is now called Struggle in a Time of Crisis. That ideas on its own, or to quote another sentence from Marx, is ideas only become a material force if they capture the imagination of the people. And I think that's, one of the challenges we are seeing, and we were thinking, what are, in the last years, some key debates? And I think the book tries to capture one area where we think the economic argument is central. The economic argument is central for also regaining confidence that we have an alternative.